can I jump in on this subject before we move on?
Yep,
so there was between last meeting and this current meeting, there was some things that happened relating to this specific report. And I just want to kind of put on the record what happened and what we might need to or want to do in the future. So as you guys know, in August, when we had the executive session with the police department, we reviewed the video, reviewed Eugene's report. This board voted to release that report upon my legal review. There was just some discussion about some board members being concerned about names or addresses or personally identifiable information that was contained in the report that we maybe wanted to redact before it was released. I did that review, and in the meantime, before it was released to anyone and me doing the review, a reporter asked for that report. And it was at that time that I worked with Jose and the chairman to kind of finalize my edits and release that report in accordance with the vote that this board took. At that, right before we were going to respond to this reporter, I kind of shot out an email to the board, just letting everyone know, hey, we got this request. I've instructed Jose to release the report. I've done my, the redactions that were discussed. And at that point, some board members expressed a desire to change the report, not in substance, but by adding sort of a disclaimer that the report was based on, Eugene's opinions, Eugene's review of the documents, and not necessarily reflective of findings of fact by the board. And I think that makes sense. But I didn't want to include that, or I didn't want to advise that language be included in the report, because that was not what we discussed at the meeting. And it was not what we discussed in terms of what my legal review or edits would be. So we did not include those changes. And my advice was that we release the report as it was and as the board voted to and as the board discussed. But going forward, if we want to make sure that that sort of language is included in an investigative report, we need to do it at the time that it's approved to be released by the board, if that all makes sense.
Thank you, Jillian. I think for me, and folks can chime in, for me, if we're if we're paying an investigator to to carry out an investigation for PERA, then that report should have PERA's name on it, and not necessarily be one that's where we're saying, hey, we have this investigative report, but it belongs to this person and it is in the opinion of this person. We're actually paying for that report. So it's actually a document that belongs to PERA and shouldn't have such disclaimer. The report has to be approved by this board, right? So we get to look at it, and then at that point we can determine whether or not we're all in agreement with moving forward and report as we did back in August. So I just wanted to, I see your hand, Susan. Okay. But I think that's something that we should own fully as an organization, as we are paying an investigator to do that work for us. Susan?
Yeah, my concern was that there should be a disclaimer that just said, based upon the information provided to us, that the report was generated, because as Mr. Montero had explained to the board, that it was his feeling that there might have been some other reports out there that were not shared with us that might have potentially changed some of the recommendations or the findings in the report. So that was the disclaimer that I thought should have been there, that we can do in the future, if that's his feeling. Thanks.
Eugene?
Yeah, I just want to touch bases on that. And again, this goes back to the fact of how the information was received, that if we choose to do a monitoring of any internal investigation, we should have access to everything. As far as whether any reports would have changed the results, everything that was reported was based on facts that were given to us through our review. Nothing in there was an opinion. It's all based on facts. I agree with Susan's point that as far as additional information, if we actually make a request or we decide to do a monitoring of internal, we should request everything so that we have a full understanding. But I, again, then agree with the chair that I've never been in a situation where I was hired to do an investigation and it was based on an opinion. It's only based on facts that are given, and then that report is presented to whatever body, entity, or company that I would be working for, and that's who owns the product.